It's really quite incredible. There was a time where I didn't think I'd ever be holding this ticket, and I got it like a couple of days ago in advance, and it's like I've caught myself just kind of staring at it from time to time because I can't believe it's real, I guess. But, yeah, so after all of the delays and the waiting and Wild Mountain Time pretty much being the only thing to kind of hold us off until we've got this, and then we've got Jungle Cruise in a couple of months. Another thing that almost seems like it's not even real at this point because of how long it's existed but not been seen. But let's go into this one because this was easily the most highly anticipated of her projects, upcoming and otherwise. And just immediately, it's been really rainy and the window's open, so hopefully that noise isn't too prominent. But yeah, so going into this, it was a case where you could kind of get a sense that, I guess because it kind of felt so small, the first movie did, and it was on like such a small budget, that it was kind of intended to be like just kind of its own thing. But of course we know, especially with horror, that that is never the case when you're in the studio system especially. So it was, I guess, a lot of ideas like came in that weren't Krasinski, and they just weren't working out. So Krasinski more or less said, "Well, maybe I can think of something." And then because I think one said she also wasn't really into the idea of a sequel, and then once like one idea was in, like one seed was planted, it was like, okay, maybe this can happen. And what's really funny about hearing that is that's pretty much how it feels watching the opening of the movie. Because I did know going, even though I avoid like trailers and stuff like that and advertisements, I was aware going in that we were going to see like kind of the start, day one, as it would be. And that's one of those cases where I heard a lot of people get really excited about that because they're like, yes, I want to see how it started and where it came from and all that. But I'm one of those people that's much more about how the less you know in a horror movie, the more effective it's going to be. So it was like, I mean, I guess we'll see what they do with that. And yeah, it's the opening where you see how it came to be that really, really sucks you into this immediately. It's like I heard Blunt say in a lot of interviews that it was like she wasn't convinced that doing a sequel was a good idea until Krasinski pitched her the opening scene, which I'm assuming would be this whole sequence. And then it's like, yeah, you kind of have that same feeling where it's like, okay, this was something can be done with this because it's a pretty lengthy sequence for an opening sequence, and I think significantly more lengthy than the first movie's opening sequence. And what's interesting about that also is the way it sets up this opening. Not just really sets up exactly, how it all started and what it looked like when it started, but it brings a lot of tragedy to it that may not have been there as much I mean, it was there in the first movie, but now there's so much more weight to that. Like when we have the opening scene of the first movie where their youngest kid is killed, which of course, is jarring and tragic and terrifying. But at the same time, we had like just met those characters when that happened, and it's like even though that sequence is short and that's the only period of time where we knew about that child, even though we see them grieving him throughout the movie, the first movie, there's significantly even more weight to it when we see them interacting and just seeing like it's jarring in general to see them normal. Like there's even a moment that almost feels like its own kind of fake out where when Krasinski's character Lee goes into the store at the beginning, which of course is the same store from the opening scene of the first movie. So that's already in our heads, and the tension is already there, even though nothing has happened yet. And it's clear that he's rushing through the store to get what he needs. So there's this sense of urgency, and it's like any other time we've ever seen this character Lee in a state of urgency, it's life or death. And it's such an interesting contrast to see that his urgency in this case is that he's late to Marcus's, the middle child's baseball game, and that's what the big rush is. And it's like that in itself just kind of sets up. It almost sets up this whole other, almost existential thing about the things that we like rush about and seem really important, like now, versus what they would be in an apocalyptic situation. So it really sets up a lot of things with just kind of this one scene that's supposedly just setting up, hey, in case you wanted to see, what it looked like when it started. But it adds so many other layers to it. And I also really like the idea of the opening shot being the stoplight that's like hanging and working. And if I remember correctly, the very first shot of the first movie is very well that very stoplight on the ground in all the rubble and all that. So just right away you get the sense that okay, I think we're headed in a good direction with whatever this movie's got up its sleeve, and it's because I was kind of wondering when I heard we were gonna see what exactly what it like. It's not necessarily an origin. Like we don't really learn anything more than we did from the brief shots of the newspapers in the first movie, but there is like there's enough here to where it's what I was afraid of was it was going to be one of those things where we kept cutting back and forth between day one and the present day of the story. But the fact that it was all in this one opening sequence, and then the rest of the movie goes on directly from where the first one was, is pretty much perfect. So there's that. And then we have the whole idea of where do we go from here. And we know going in that there's going to be a new character introduced who is Cillian Murphy, who is very. I guess I should say something really quick here, which I meant to say at the beginning, which was I don't plan on like spoiling everything, but I will say that I might be saying more than somebody would want to hear if they want to go in with as little information as possible. So just putting that warning out there. Um, the Cillian Murphy character is actually introduced in the opening scene, so we see him in more or less a normal life also, but we don't know too much about that. It keeps up the thing where we don't really know too much about anybody prior to the creatures coming down. Like even the Abbott family, like we see them and how they interacted as a family, but it's still not like too much information. Like there's still that air of mystery around all the characters we know in regards to where they started versus where they came from, but we see just enough to see the contrast of what's between then and now. Because that kind of seems like the whole setup for this movie is a contrasting of worlds, because you've got that whole thing of the before and after, and then you've got this whole other thing when they're leaving that sand path for the first time, and there's literally like, as far as the visual looks, it literally looks like a world that's like split down the middle. When we see where the path ends and then where it's just beyond into whatever. And it's like it's like this really big moment when they step off of it, and it's like you can almost sense they're stepping into almost like another dimension. Because that's how much this whole world has been torn apart and split up into other pieces and all that. But talking about the introduction of this Cillian Murphy character, it is a case where it seemed like they were hinting at the ideas, like before it came out, before any advertisement even really been released, just kind of Krasinski talking about the ideas behind it, or Blunt talking about the ideas behind it, was this idea of when you have this otherworldly threat, a lot of times, like it's really kind of become a cliche in regards to like zombie movies and zombie shows, like going way back to like early zombie movies, that there is a separate threat that is human, and it's like how you'll run into human characters that are just as big of a threat as the creatures themselves. And another reason that was kind of concerning going in was it's like maybe it'll become its own thing, and you won't think about those other movies and all that, except for the fact that Cillian Murphy's in it. And 28 Days Later is probably one of the best movies to ever do the humans that are just as threatening as the monster threat. So here, but it was also another thing of there's that, or there's the fact that Blunt has made it perfectly clear that she's kind of obsessed with Peaky Blinders, which I'm assuming Krasinski would be as well. So it's like it's when you hear Kelly Murphy's casted on this, is like, did they really want to make a sequel, or did they just really want an excuse for both of them to work with Cillian Murphy? It could be either one. But no, there's a lot of new ideas they have here that go beyond that whole cliche of humans are just as big of a threat now, or whatever. And it is very interesting, and I'm sure this will get brought up to death when other people talk about it. But it is interesting, the very coincidental connotations, because obviously the reason we're only seeing this movie now is everything that has happened in the last year, or over a year now, and how many sort of things that kind of bleed into this movie that we're kind of already, like, it makes the movie even more immersive than it maybe ever would have been. Where it's like when we run into some people that may not be trustworthy, prior to this you may wonder, like, you know, why would that be the case, or oh, is the movie kind of reaching or something like that. But it's like, to see how willing people are to make enemies in a widespread crisis has become more apparent recently. So it's like, when you see these people that are antagonistic seemingly for no reason, it's just like, yeah, that's probably about where we'd be on day 474. Long past that point, even. Um, but like I said, it does go into more of that, and there's also a lot of, like, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but I got some. This is a case where I don't want to say necessarily too much, even though I probably wouldn't be anyway. Um, but a lot of audiences might get a bit of an ambiguity out of it that might be intentional or not. Where it's like, when you meet characters, you kind of always wonder, are they going to be trustworthy or not? Um, but there is a couple of other things I wanted to mention here about kind of these first scenes where we see Cillian Murphy in his bunker, where they are hiding now, Evelyn and the two children. And the thing here is that I was a little concerned about the setting of this bunker, because since they're so protected now, well, is more so than they were in the first movie anyway, it gives them more freedom to speak. Not, like, necessarily, like, they're still kind of speaking in whispers, but there's still steady dialogue in this bunker scene. And I was kind of wondering how I was going to feel about more dialogue, because obviously one of the great things about the first movie is how it did pretty much everything with as little dialogue as possible. Like, the only time I really remember outright dialogue in the first movie is when, towards the end, when she's giving her "we have to protect them" speech. It's like the only thing that's kind of said in a relatively normal level. Um, and here we get a little more of that because of this bunker setting, but um, a surprisingly small amount of the movie is spent in this bunker, because obviously there's a whole bunch of other stuff that needs to be done. They end up getting split up because Reagan, the daughter, Millicent Simmons' character, thinks, because of what they discovered at the end of the last movie, that she's going to be the one that can save them. So she kind of tries to go on her own little mission, and once this separation happens, then everybody has to start going their own way until they can hopefully come back together. But throughout these scenes, we do get a lot of stuff. Like, they really, like, spent some time on how do we make some really effective scenes without dialogue. And we've got, like, this great scene where for a brief moment, Millicent Simmons thinks she's been abandoned. And of course, sticking with that theme of her being a deaf character, most of the scenes where she's alone, the sound just goes out entirely. And so the way we kind of get a sense, like almost physically as an audience member, that isolation and that feeling of being stranded, um, really, they play with that a lot, especially with her character. And then there's also a lot of stuff where they have to do what would otherwise be a mundane task very, very, very carefully. Like I was talking about that opening scene in the pharmacy in the first movie when Blunt grabs a pill bottle and it kind of slightly nudges a bottle next to it and it makes you flinch, even though it's just a small thing. And then there is a kind of amazing moment in this where Blunt is coming out of the bunker, and as she's gonna close the door, she has to close this door excruciatingly slowly. And it's one of those cases where you would think that'd be the kind of thing that's a bit too drawn out, but no, the suspense is always there. Like, the closer and closer she gets to shutting it, the less you're thinking, we can speed this scene up. It's actually the more you're thinking, the suspense ramps up, and you're praying to God it doesn't make a single sound at all. And there's a few scenes like that. Where for some reason Marcus can't stay his ass in the bunker. He keeps wanting to come in and out. But that's the whole thing. Also, the whole idea of feeling stranded, where that's something else I want to get into, by the way. But this whole thing of where it's this big moment where Evelyn is saying she has to leave to get something very important, and she has to leave Marcus with the baby. And there's that feeling of, like, seeing Blunt go. Like, you get such that maternal sort of attachment, that whenever, like, Blunt leaves and one of the kids has to stay behind, you get the sense of... And not just because, people like me, they go into this, like, strictly as, blunt obsessives or whatever. That she's the one that people like me are here to see. So it's like whenever her presence comes and goes, it's always going to have that mark on the movie. But specifically as far as her character and her placement here, and her placement with the other characters, that plays a big part in when she comes and goes. But yeah, talking about that, I think that's the reason Marcus would come and go from the bunker, is he's just waiting so hard for her to come back, that it starts to get terrifying by the time the sun goes down. Is that people got extremely sort of pedantic about the first movie, naturally. When you have, like, high concept movies like that, you're going to have these people that think they're really fucking clever, that try to poke the holes in it, when really the idea is to just be cinematic. But they want to get down to every single possible detail of it and say, well, why would this thing happen? Why not do this thing? And all that shit. And I got that vibe that I really liked, where I was kind of afraid that happened so much with the first movie that Krasinski would, like, give into it and try less being cinematic and more try to get down to those details so that people aren't nitpicking the shit out of it. And I love that he didn't, like, bow down to that. Like, he still put things in here that are here basically just for the reason of being cinematic. Like, the idea of, these people that are potentially out there, and they put out a signal, but the signal is just playing the song Beyond the Sea, the Bobby Darin song. And what I love about that is that obviously could have just... I can see people already complaining, like, why didn't they just give a clear signal of, we are these people, we are in this place. Like Will Smith and I Am Legend or something. But I love that. The reason it's Beyond the Sea is because it's just cinematic, I think. And that's more than enough for me, to go to a movie like this. I want the story to be told in those really theatrical kind of ways, and not stick to this whole, it absolutely must be this thing, because that would be what it would be like in real life or whatever. Because they do that enough. Like, there's enough of a balance of this is what it would really be like, and just being cinematic for the sake of being cinematic. And the combination of the two, I think, works a lot better than just being strictly one or the other. because you could have a really tedious movie if you constantly try to stick to everything goes absolutely right because characters make every single right decision. Like, it gets so fucking annoying in movies like this when people complain about that so, like, specifically to, and a lot of it doesn't even matter. Like the whole thing where it was the newspapers that we saw in the first movie that say, like, it's sound, the weakness, or that's how they find us, is sound. But the thing is everybody was going, oh, it's so loud to print newspapers, they never would have gotten those out. And it's like, I don't fucking care. I love the fact that it looks like a classic monster movie to see those, like, newspaper articles like that. Like, it felt like something you'd see in, like, a 50s sci-fi movie or something. And that's its purpose. It's not to... It gets really annoying so when people complain about that shit, but whatever. Um, going on also, as far as like the way the characters interact, even when they've gone their separate ways, is stuff that I really like. Like the way they set up a lot of stuff. Like there's a point in time where naturally, Reagan has to face a creature by herself, but she's got the thing. She's got the implant and all that stuff, and she can do the radio and all that. So she can weaken them, and then of course she's going to... She may have just found a gun laying around, which in this world makes perfect sense because we see in the opening scene this whole thing where... another thing that's great about the opening scene is we see all the weaknesses. Like when you see where we got to in the first movie, and it's like how everybody got wiped out and how quickly that probably happened because nobody knew exactly what was going on or how they tracked people and what their weakness was or whatever. So we saw all the weaknesses in the humans where it was like they were talking, one guy was praying, and then there's the cop that tries shooting it repeatedly. And it's like the more he shoots at it, just the worse off he's going to be. Like he's just really showing his location with that. So it's like the fact that a lot of people's first instinct was probably to shoot at it, which would immediately get them killed. Yeah, there's probably going to be guns laying around everywhere, which is really convenient for our characters that actually know how to kill them. So, in this point in time, when she weakens it, it was like, we get that first scene. It almost felt like a callback. Like, I don't even know if this was the intention, but there's the scene in the first movie where she's teaching Marcus, like, math, or Evelyn is teaching Marcus math or something. And she's being like his teacher, and it's like the way you basically have to, like, even not in an environment like this, you just kind of learn things from your parents, or you pick up things from your parents. And there was this moment that I just really loved, this thought that ran through my head when Reagan was weakening the creature, and as its armor was like coming off and doing that whole thing, and she raised the shotgun. My immediate first thought was, yeah, do it like mom does it. And it's like the idea of, in this kind of world, this is the kind of thing kids are picking up from parents now. It's just how to survive. Like that was like the whole point of Krasinski's character in the first one. Was he was just like, that was his whole like tunnel vision mindset, was survival, survival. And we got like the heart of the movie came from Blonde and her interactions with the kids. And of course we got that moment right before Lee's death, but I mean, as far as like the contrast of where they were, that's a compliment to Lee's character, by the way, the whole idea that he was the tunnel vision survival character. And the way that carries over in this one, and how they have to kind of... He's basically like this sort of... It's almost like a martyr kind of figure, which, being that Krasinski wrote and directed it, might... Some people might say that's self-serving, but it's actually a really good kind of thing for the way his character carries over, and it's like, these are the things he would have done. Because he was like the main survivalist of the whole group, and it's like, when Cillian Murphy says he figured something out, immediately Reagan is angry, saying, you couldn't have possibly known something that my dad didn't. And it's like the character stuff like that is really powerful. And like I said, it's stuff that's already been established in this world. It's not even stuff we had to bring in from, like, whether it be the past or new information or whatever. So that's and as far as there's something else that we get a lot of in this movie that we didn't in the first one, and that is, if I remember correctly, there's 3 deaths in the first movie. Bo, the youngest kid, the old guy in the woods, and Lee, I think. And all 3 of those deaths happen the same way. We see the creature lunge, and then it cuts away right before we see the death. So there is the whole thing where we get to actually kind of see the monsters, like they just terrorize like big groups of people, like in the opening scene when all the people are running around in chaos, not knowing what to do, and we just see the way they take. And like obviously, we're still dealing with PG-13, so it's from kind of a distance, but there's still enough. There was one point where I wasn't quite sure if I was just seeing this or it was just the lighting or what, but I'm pretty sure I saw a creature run by a dude, and that dude flew off screen, and the only thing in his wake was a red mist. And it's like, that's really cool. Like, that could have just been the lighting, but I'm almost positive I saw a red mist. And if that's the case, that's a really cool way to do that while sticking to the PG-13. Um, and it's one scene I forgot to mention real quick. Talking about Lee's death was going on another thing about the use of no dialogue to have these powerful moments. Another one is when Evelyn goes back to the bridge where Bo was killed, and there's that little memorial that they set up. Um, and they make it known in this moment now that that memorial is for 2 people. And it's like there's like no dialogue, just Blunt does like one simple action that's like heart shattering. And it's because I've talked about endlessly in this little Blunt series, among other cases, that Blunt has a way of showing so much emotion without saying anything. Like like just in looks. She could. I mean, the first movie and this one almost ask for it, but I do genuinely think easily she could do an entire movie's worth of scenes with no dialogue, like just with expression and just with her eyes. She could tell an entire. She could be the only person. She could do a one-person show for 3 hours with no other cast members, and she could make something really emotional out of it. And I said she doesn't get. It feels like she doesn't get as much screen time in this. I do remember going in that Krasinski said he kind of wanted Mills and Simmons to be the star of the movie, which is great and kind of a really nice shift. But this is another case where like everybody gets a big moment at some point, which is great. Like the love is really spread throughout this. I kind of feel like the first movie did that well also, but obviously with this one we're getting bigger moments for everybody that really pay off in a really great way. There is... I was disappointed in one thing. This honestly might be my only problem with this movie. I was kind of looking forward to more Jaimin. We really don't get much Jaimin at all. He comes in really late. And there was a whole thing where he was supposed to be Brian Tyree Henry, but there was a scheduling conflict. But I was really excited. I was really excited when Brian Tyree Henry was in it, but I was just as excited, if not more so, when Jaimin was the recasting choice. But there's something to his character also that's kind of similar to the Cillian Murphy character, where it's like we get to know enough through a little bit of dialogue, but they don't like pummel us with information. Like it's one of those cases where I'm pretty sure Jaimin's character doesn't even get a name. But we get just enough of a sense of what's going on. And like the same thing with Cillian Murphy's character, who's handled really well, where it's like we see just enough of him in the beginning to know what he had to lose, and then the only thing we need to know is that he lost it. And then Murphy can just do the rest. And they're able to create a really juicy character out of that, especially with his sort of distrust in everybody. And how it's one of those cases where it's an interesting case where I don't necessarily think this is saying too much either. The whole thing I was talking about where the idea of the human characters not being trustworthy when you go out there in a situation like this. And it's like, it's interesting that Cillian Murphy's character is a threat at first only in the sense that he's very protective of himself because he trusts nobody. Like, even you could be the most trustworthy character ever, but if he doesn't know that, he's going to be very. He's going to do what he can to protect himself. And I thought that was a really interesting kind of character to bring into this, especially making him a major character. Um, so there is that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Really, I mean, I'm sure I could go on. I could go on for days if I see this more than once, which I'm sure I will. If the drive-in gets it, I'll certainly probably want to go there. But I guess the last thing I wanted to end on would probably be um, just how well directed this is, and because obviously I have not always praised Krasinski in general. Like, as far as like an actor, it's like I've said before that I think he excels in comedy, but like as far as like being an action star, I haven't really been able to buy him that much. And then when he started directing, he did that movie Brief Interviews with Hideous Men, which I did not say anything good about. And he did The Haulers also, which is just there. But as far as like really getting to like show what he can do, um, the first movie said so much. And then you've got this one that he also wrote seemingly single-handedly. With I'm assuming there were blunt contributions here and there. She seems very in any movie she does. She seems very heavy in the contributing process, which is probably why a lot of her stuff is so good. But here it was a case of she said something during her Howard Stern interview that was really sweet, where it was because you look at the whole idea that he started off like his main thing is that he was Jim on The Office, and once you do like there was a whole thing where when Will Smith did Fresh Prince, somebody told him make sure when you do your TV show to use your real name because it's the name that people are going to call you for the rest of your life if you get popular on a TV show. And so since forever now, Krasinski has been Jim Albert from The Office. And then, with that in mind, Blunt said during this Stern interview that one of the big reasons she was so excited about people seeing this movie is that she feels like it'll finally start getting to a point with like the more he directs and the more he puts work like this out there, that people will finally start seeing him as more like the way she worded it was basically people will start to see what she has known for some time, which is how much more he is than, just the Jim character. Um, and so that's. I could really see that happening. It is curious, given that those other two movies he did weren't horror, I'm wondering if it's like. Because apart from maybe comedy, directing seems to kind of be his top calling. Clearly after these two movies. So I'm wondering if it's directing horror specifically, or if we'll see him venture into other genres and see what he's capable of. Stuff that's more like this, where stuff is like really heightened, whether it be emotions or intensity or whatever it may be. Like maybe that's what his main calling as a director is. And I'm really excited to find out whatever that is. Obviously, it's been teased a lot lately that this is intended to be a trilogy now. And that's another case that's interesting, where it's like the fact that the first one was always intended to be a standalone movie until he was almost pressured into coming up with an idea that just happened to work. But now it's like it's starting to make sense as a multiple part story that is in this trilogy mindset, and this whole thing with the Zemeckis thing, where it's like it's best to be a trilogy because that's the whole act structure is 1, 2, 3. So whatever they've definitely set that up. A lot of people are probably going to be upset if the ending's kind of abrupt, kind of like they were with the first one. For however many people are probably going to complain that this movie's abrupt, I'm just going to say right now, I kind of fucking love this ending. I love what it sets up, and the fact that you can tell it's, going to keep going. But just how big it is, like it's like the first movie. Like it's the action on screen. If you were to just put it in words, isn't that much. But like I said, just the way he really has a hold on making it as cinematic as possible is exactly what he pulls off, and that's everything I could have asked for in a movie like this. So yes, so a lot of people are saying, it's better than the first. There's also a lot of people saying it's good, but not as good as the first. I don't know. I'm probably gonna have to see it another, because I saw the first one in theaters 3 times, and then God knows how many after Blu-ray. And it's like after I've done this one that many times, then I might be able to answer that question. But right off, it'd be unfair to this one because I just can't be as sure. So that's probably going to happen. Like I said, I'll probably see it again before it's even left theaters. So, yeah. So I guess that's going to be it for this until Jungle Cruise at the end of July, I think. And obviously all the other reviews in between, like Spiral, I'll do, and Army of the Dead and stuff like that. But this was all I really cared about for like the last however, like as soon as its date was set, this is all I cared about. So, yeah. So we'll just basically wait for Jungle Cruise to get here and do whatever we need to in between. And until then, I think that's it.